In this lesson, I'm going to go over pivots. Pivots are really essential for moving objects and moving them from certain points on the object. So if you want to move this object, what will happen is we'll go to on our toolbar, we'll get our move tool. You'll pick move and you'll pick the object, and then so you'll see it's always moving from the center point there. Okay. So, but like you see, like I have the model here, it's sitting below the plane, the ground plane. So I want to actually move it up. So I'd actually like to get the pivot like right on the edge there. So let me do a trick here just so we can actually use the grid snaps easily. So I'm going to double the size on this one. So if I shift select over here and I type in 2, I'll scale my object up exactly. And the reason I'm doing this is just for this demo, so it fits exactly on these grid lines here. Okay, so now here's what I'm going to do. You pick it again. Moving pivots is always good to do with the move command. And the way to do that is to press D. Press D. Now, if you notice, you still have your move widget, but it's changed a bit. Now it has this little circle in here, and you'll see I'll move the widget, but the object isn't moving. So this is just going to move the point from which the whole object moves or rotates. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my snaps. So I'm going to pick this up here in the status line, and I'm going to move it down to exactly on my grid line. So now I know, because I know the edge of this sits right on the grid line because I scaled up an exact point. Okay, so now I can move from there. You still have to get out of this mode. You have to get out of the modify your mode for your pivot. So that what you do is just type D again. So now you're out of that mode. So now it's back to actual normal moving. So now watch what happens. Now when I move it up, it'll move up. So that bottom plane, that bottom face, sits literally right on the ground here. So that's how you get your pivot point to be at the bottom of your object. Okay, so this is a handy thing to do, because a lot of times when you are moving objects, it's just like you have like an object in a room, you'll kind of move it from its floor point. Okay, so that's a way to do this. Okay, now I'm going to show you another way to do this, a little trickier, but in case you can't get to the grid lines, I'm going to actually rescale this back to its normal size to 1. Actually, yeah, and let me show you one other thing too. All right, this, in case you want to reset your pivot, so maybe you've changed your pivot just like I did, but now I want to get back to 0 because I want to get back to the original state that the model was in, and I'm going to do this all manually. So you want to get your pivot back. You want to get rid of your user-defined pivot, okay? So then you'll go up to, you're going to go up to modify, and you'll go up to center pivot, okay? So now that goes right back to your original pivot point. And you're going to want to do this sometimes. You're going to want to reset, and it'll pick the center point. When you have an object that's kind of complex, a bunch of stuff, what it does is it picks by the bounding box, and the bounding box basically is the full volume of the extreme points of your model. So whatever the full height or width of your model is at its maximum points. Okay, so that's how you do that. So now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move back down to here. Okay, so now it's at its origin point, the original point when we started. All right, so say I couldn't change the grids, or I didn't want to, or the object was unusual. Then what I would do, there's a little trick here to do. It works sometimes, well, it works most of the time, sometimes it won't. So you have to, if it doesn't, then you have to figure something else out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, first off, I'm going to switch off the grid snap, right? And I'm going to pick on the object. I'm in the move mode already. So then I'm going to type D to get me into my pivot mode, okay? But what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to do snap to point, okay? And then I'm going to just pull on one axis. So it's going to pull up or it's going to pull down, okay? So what it's doing is it's constrained to moving on an axis, but it's looking for a point to go to. So it can't move side to side, but it can move down. So at least it's taking the point, the lowest point here, and it's using that as the point to snap to, okay? So that's useful in case you want to get to a face on an object, all right? So that works in this case. I'll type D, okay? Now I can do the same thing. Now, so look, this doesn't match the grid here. And then I can use my grid snap there. I'm gonna switch off the point snap. And now it'll move just to those grid points. So that's another way to do that, okay? So now there's another instance here. So let me go into a full perspective window here. You might want to get it onto one of these corners. That's a little trickier. We've gone over component mode, and if you haven't gone over component mode, there's a video on components. So go look at the component mode video and you'll understand more about what the components are of an object. So you basically, the most basic level component is vertex, and then there's edge, which are these lines here, and then there's face, which are the actual 3D faces, okay? So now you can display some of these. So for this demo that I'm going to show you, you're going to need to have your vertices always displayed. Now, if you wanted to just display them while you're working on things, you can do that. You hover over the model and you right click, and this gives you access to edge, vertex, and face, okay? So let me show you what happens when I do that. When I go to vertex, now they're available, okay? So you can do other things. You can edit the model with these in that mode. All right. So I'm going to click over here. Now the thing is, though, we can't get to our pivot. So let me show you a couple other things too. So say I wanted to go in face. Right. Now you can pick the faces of your object. Okay. You could move them if you wanted. But that's another lesson. Okay. Now I'm going to click out here in space, and then if I want to, there's one other thing we can also modify an object with is by the edges. You know, you can actually select the edges. You can select the components of this object, okay? All right, but now what I need to do is I need to see them all the time. Like this will allow you to do an edit here, but then it kicks out. Then once the move is done or the whatever you do to it, rotation or transform or whatever, then it stops. There is a way to make everything show all the time. So let me get out of component mode. Okay, now we're back in object mode. Okay, so now if I pick it, it'll turn green. Okay, so let me get into select mode so I'm not accidentally moving anything. All right, so now I want to pick the object, and then you can go over to display, polygons, and then in here, there's all different kinds of things you can do for displaying. What I'm doing is just showing you really specific subsets of things that we want to get to in each lesson. Okay, so, you know, at some other point when you're doing stuff, you can try all these other things. But for this lesson right now, all you're going to do is go to display, polygons, and you're going to go over here to vertices. Okay. So now those vertices we were picking before, now you can see them all the time. When I pick over here, though, it doesn't pick the individual one. Do you know why? We've done that in another lesson. In our mode states here, okay? So we're in object mode right now. We've done a little work with hierarchy with groups. Now we're, you know, in component mode here. There's a lesson on components. So I have to shift to component mode if I want to access those, okay? So I was in vertex mode, so let me go. I mean, I was in edge mode, so let me go to vertex. Now, if I wanted to, I could pick these and leave them all selected. Okay, so that's if you wanted to just have these on for modeling purposes. All right, but we're not doing that for this one. Okay, so say we want to have this on a real specific corner. So I want to move the vertex, not the vertex, but the pivot to a specific vertex. What I need to do is go back to object mode. Okay, so I'm in object mode. I need to pick this. Let me get into my move command. Okay, so now our pivot is in the center there, but I want to put it on a corner. So I'm going to move it. I'm going to put it on that corner there, this edge corner. Okay, so what I need to do is I'm going to turn it off. I'm gonna turn off grid snap, and I'm gonna turn on point snap. Okay, now I'm gonna type D. Okay, so now you notice now I am all of a sudden this thing's live, and I can move this, but I have my vertices open on. Okay, so what you need to do, you need to be kind of careful with this because it gets a little tricky. But there you go. See, now I've moved it to that little corner there. Okay, so this is a really good trick. Takes a little time to get used to and get the hang of it. But once you do, then it's really powerful because especially Maya isn't like completely like an architectural modeler, like whereas an architectural modeler, so you'll be able to get these pivots a little more easily. Maya is more of an organic modeler in some ways with a lot of architectural components. So this will let you get to a good snap point on a corner. Okay, so again, remember type D, and there you go. So now you have your core. Now it's got a nice, if you want, like I said, if you want to build buildings, this will really help here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my grid snap back on, and I'm going to move this, and you see, look, boom, went right to that corner there. Okay, I mean right to that grid point. The corner went right to that grid point there. So that's what you want to do. And then if you're like, especially if you're building a building or a very square object with like blocks and pieces, you're going to want to do this. And the cool thing here too is if I pick on this and I go up to edit, duplicate, let me turn off grid snap. Let me turn off all snaps for the moment. What will happen is when I move this up, it inherits that same pivot point there. Okay, so the pivot I created for this main original block is inherited in the new block. And now what I can do is say I want to snap this exactly to that corner there. Then what we'll do is we'll put on our point snap, and boom, there you go. So for some of the lessons, we're going to be doing some buildings or for some very structural kind of things, and this is what you're going to need to do. Okay, so try it out. This is all interesting stuff. Gives you a lot of power for modeling, and some of it takes a little getting used to. But once you do, then you'll be fine. And then especially too, if you go on to animating and things like that, then pivots become even more important. Okay, all right, so that's the end of our lesson on pivots, and on to the next one. Okay.